In today's lecture, we look at two important concepts. The first is how to add a user, delete a user, which is something, a task that you will probably be doing quite a bit if you're administering a Linux box. The second is dealing with file permissions, which is an important security concept, because if you don't understand about file permissions, and that includes for regular files, non-executable files, as well as executable files, you could put yourself in a lot of trouble, because it could allow anybody to read proprietary, important, secretive information, and that's not a good thing. So, first of all, let's look at how to add a user. Now, we kind of touched on this in a previous video, but we'll go into it in a little more depth here. So there's a couple of ways to add a user, but I'm going to show you the easiest way, and you should follow along, and you should add your own users to the system. And so to add a user, first of all, let's type which add user. So which shows us where that's located. Notice that's located in the sbin directory, so the super user directory, sbin. If we do an ls-al on this, sbin add user. Who owns this? Root. And root. And I'll talk about these permissions in a little bit. But let's try to run this add user as a regular user. So add user, I'm running this as PC, and we're going to add the user John J. Smith. How about that? Only root may add a user or a group to the system. So we're going to need to run this as a root. So a few things that we see that's being done, it's adding the user J. Smith. We'll see where it's added in a second. And in fact, if you go back and look at the networking and SSH video, I kind of showed you where all that information was, so I'll very briefly go over that again. Notice that it added a new group J. Smith, a new user J. Smith with user ID number 1002 with group J. Smith. It created a home directory, and it copied the files from Etsy Skeleton. We'll go over that in just a second. We'll go ahead and we'll type in their password, John Smith, room number 120, and I'm just going to skip through these by hitting enter. Is this information correct? Yes, so we've added a new user. And you know from the SSH networking video that if you go to less Etsy password, go to the bottom and you see that J. Smith has been added. The user ID and group ID, the full name, the office number, and notice that home J. Smith and the shell was bash. And so let's go to home. We can just go up like this and type J. Smith, and there's J. Smith's directory. So you see that there's not very much in it right now. So what do you think is it? Remember that the add user command added the Etsy Skeleton files. What do you think's in there? Well, I can guarantee you that these are in there. So this is the very basic information, the basic files that are copied as default when you add a user. Okay, what if J. Smith wanted to change his password? Well, first of all, what if you wanted, J. Smith said he forgot his password. It was a long password and it needs to be reset. How do you do that? Well, what you're going to have to do is, if he can't remember his password, is that you're going to have to do that for him. And the way we do this is with a password file. So we type sudo password and then J. Smith, whomever's password we want to change. Enter the new password. And that updated J. Smith's password. If I wanted to change my password, I'm allowed to do that as a user PC. So if I just type password, notice it said password unchanged. Oh boy, I don't want to change my password. So notice that it asks for my current Unix password and then enter the new passwords. And you must change it in here. Oh, it's not going to let me get out of this. Okay, enter the new Unix password. Okay, so it's this is funny because I haven't run into this before. It's using something called the Pluggable Authentication module. It's a security module that's used for a number of purposes, one of which, as you can see here, is to identify good and bad passwords. It's saying it's too similar to the other previous password, and you've probably seen something like this in Windows. Windows, you can set it up so it makes you change your password on an occasional basis. You can still do the same thing with the PAM authentication module. And it's still saying it is. Okay, so it says password and change. Good. I'm glad because I didn't want to have to change my password. So that's good because you can set up your password system so that the passwords have to be a certain length and a certain number of upper, lowercase, and numbers, and any level of complexity that you'd like to set up. Of course, the downside of that is a couple of things. Is one of which is if you set it up so that the passwords have to be extremely complex, or they have to be changed on a too often basis, then users are going to write down their passwords. But anyway, that's the way you change a password. So JSmith's password has been changed. Notice I had to run this as sudo for JSmith because I'm going to have to run that as root because I'm changing somebody else's password. Whereas my own password I can change. Okay, so JSmith has been fired. The first thing we can do is we can set it up so we're going to delete the JSmith's account. And the way we do this is if we can add a user, we can delete a user. So let's look at user del and look at some of the options. So if let's say JSmith is still logged in, we can use the -F flag, forces removal of the user account, even if the user is still logged in. So in occasion that might happen. So you need to be able to do that because maybe you're waiting for the police to show up to get the guy out and he's copying imported information off a hard drive he shouldn't have access to. So that's the way to kick him off the system. The -R, remove files in the user's home directory. And the mail spool. And the mail spool is just the user's mail. So let me show you. We're going to run this with the -R command. So sudo user del -R and JSmith. That's all we have to do. Oh, first of all, I'm sorry. I did show you that those files were there. So JSmith. And let's go to see if JSmith's directory is still there. And it's not. Let's say we want to get rid of, notice that hello is down here. Let's get rid of hello. Sudo user del hello. Now we're not using the -R. Let's see what happens. What did I misspell? That user hello does not exist. Oh, I deleted that person before. Okay, I did delete user hello before, but look what it left. It left their home directory. And maybe you want to do that. Maybe you just want to delete their login account so they can't log in, but maybe there's important files in hello's directory that you want to copy over or you want to maintain for a little while before you delete that information. Now let's look at how to change ownership of files. So we'll type clear, go back to our home directory. Let's see who owns these files. Notice that the ownership of all these files, notice that this column right here says PC all the way down. That's my username and that's my group name. And notice that I own all of these files. Okay, so what this means is the ownership is that it's really important when you look over here to the left and you look at these permissions. We already looked at what the first column meant, and we kind of went over very quickly what the other columns mean, but let's go in more detail. Notice that the first column is either going to be a dash or D in this instance. The dash just means it's a regular file. It's just a file. And the D means it's a directory. If you look at the D here and over here, you notice that this is in blue color, which is just a convention. It doesn't have to be, but the D definitely indicates that this .Linux Mint is a directory. Now, The next 9 columns are very important, and these are the permissions for the file. This is dealing with access control. This is dealing with whether somebody can read or write or execute a file. So from the left, let's look at the first. Notice this says RWX. So the first R means that PC, in fact, all this RWX deals with the owner of the file, the first RWX. So PC. So the owner of the file, as owner, I can read, I can write to, and I can execute this .Linux mint. And the X, it's kind of weird because the X and the R with regard to a directory really means, can I get in there and can I read this stuff? Can I read the .Linux mint directory and its contents? That being said, let me move down here to just a regular file. So that's an important concept. In fact, let's prove this right now. Let's make a directory, mk dir, and we're just going to call this oops. Okay, so there's our oops directory. And notice it's got the read, write, and execute for PC. It's got the read and execute for the second set of permissions, and that is dealing with the group. So while the read, write, and execute, the first group deals with the user, the R-X here deals with whomever is in this group. And so right now I am the only person in my own group, but I can actually add users to that group. And finally, the third set of permissions deal with anybody else. So if you're not the owner, if you're not in the group, and then this means, hey, anybody else, not the owner and not the group. And this essentially stands for other. So this says essentially that pretty much anybody on this system can CD to the oops directory because it's got an R and an X there. Let's change that. Let's change that. And you're not going to understand what I'm doing here. So it's not going to make sense, but I will explain what we're doing. But it'll show you that the R and X have to be there for the directory. So what we're going to do is that we're going to change the permissions so it's just write. I'll explain that. Notice now it just has the write for user, group, and other. So let's CD to oops directory. Oops, and that's why I named it oops. Permission denied. Can't do it. Let's go back and change that to we're going to go change that to 5. Oops. That's why I named all this stuff oops. And we'll go back and look at the oops directory. So it's back to what it was. Let's change the oops directory, and there's nothing in there. But let's move all these GZ files to oops. Okay, so those files in there. So now let's just take away the read permission. Let's see. So now I'm taking away the read permission. So now you see under oops, there's the read, execute, the write, execute, execute, and execute. So let's go under oops. So it allows me in to oops, but let's try to read what's ever in there. Permission denied, cannot open directory. Okay, so that shows you, just scroll back up, get the original permissions. Okay, just to make things a little clearer, let's go in and my IPs, let's see what's in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change ownership of that was called my IPs. Notice that this says read, write, read, and read. really doesn't make sense to have this executable because it's just a plain old file. But I can read it and write it. Anybody else can read it that's in my group PC, and really anybody on the system can read it. And so we're going to change this. We're going to change ownership of this file so that root owns it. Sudo change own. Change ownership. And we're going to type root. And actually, we're going to make this full. We're going to make it so not only is root the owner, but also the group is root. And then my IPS. There we see. So now root is the owner and the group root. So let's try to cat this file. Oh, actually I can. I can cat this file. Why? Or why can I use less? Why can I open this up and view the contents? Because I'm running as PC, right? And it's owned by root and group root. Well, I'm not root. Let's just say if I just try to cat it as PC, I'm not in the group root, but look at the R over here in other, which means I can read it. So cat my IPS. Boom. I can read it. Okay, I'm going to open this up in Nano. Okay, my IPS. There we go. Look, I'm reading it. Notice at the bottom in here it says no write permission. Bull. I'm going to try it. Let's write this bad boy. Well, first let's make some changes. There are some changes. Now I'm going to try to write it. My IPS. Error writing my IPS, permission denied. I do not have permission to write to this file. Okay, so I've changed that to root. What if I did this? Sudo change owner. What if I, let's go back up here. Notice that there's a JPC also on here. So let's change the ownership, excuse me, of that file to JPC and PC. Can I do that? Let's see if I can do. Those are two distinct users in my IPs. There's JPC and there's PC. I can do that running as root, is I can change this to anything I want. I changed it to root ownership. I've changed it to JPC. I can change it to anybody. Let's go back and let's change that ownership back to root and root my IPS. And now I'm just going to try to change this as a regular user back to me. I want that back to me. Operation not permitted. You got to run that as root. If I tried to run that as anybody, as long as I can run it as root, I can change ownership. But that's because it is owned by root, right? Okay, let me change this. Let me change this one more time. Sudo change owner PC my IPS. Okay, so now I want to change owner. So the owner is me, but the group is JPC. Can I do that? Operation not permitted. So the reason is I'm trying to change it to a group of which I'm not part of the group. So I could do that as root, but I can't here. Okay, let's look at let's look at changing these permissions. What if you wanted to change the permission on a directory? You could also do that as well. With oops, we never changed the permissions on that directory, so sudo change owner root. What if I just did one root? What happens? So in other words, I didn't put the .root. Let's see what happens. ls-al and look at now. Root is the owner, but anybody in PC can also read this. Does that make any sense? Well, it may or may not. In this instance, it doesn't. Now, if you wanted to change just the group, you can use this command, sudo chgrp, and then root. So that's change group, not change owners, and then oops. And now oops has the group changed to root. Okay, so you saw earlier how I was changing permissions and it looked like magic. Well, it's really not. And there's a couple of ways to do that, and we'll go over both of the different ways. So I showed you that the chmod command is used to change the permissions on a file. And we talked about each of the permissions. So there's a couple of ways to do this. I was using the octal notation as you saw before. And we'll go over that second, but let's go over maybe something that's easier and maybe something more difficult. I find it much easier to use the octal notation. So we talked about, with respect to permissions, let's look at this, let me see, this 3.txt here. In fact, before you do anything, I want you to do this. You should be, by the way, following along with me in your VM and running these commands. So let's touch my file, .txt. My file.txt, there it is. Notice permissions over here. Notice the ownership. So we're not going to mess with the ownership anymore. We're just going to mess with the permissions. And so we talked about this as the owner or user's permissions, right? The owner's or user's permissions. And this as the group permissions, and this as anybody else, so other. So user, group, and other. So U, G, O, other. If you look at all these permissions, we can consider those as being all the permissions. So take a look at that. U, user, G, group, O, other, A, all. Okay, so let's change the permissions of my file.txt so that it's read, read, read. How would we do that? So I own this, so I can change permissions on it. I don't need to use sudo, right? So for user, because the only thing I want to do is take out that W. I want to subtract write capability. So user subtract write capability for my file.txt. Do we have RR and R? Yes. Okay, I want to add read and write capability for user, group, and other. I could do that a couple of different ways. Here's the hard way. You could do chmod, user plus write, group plus write, other plus write, my file.txt. So you're adding write capability to each of the user, group, and other. Is that what we have? So I hope you're getting the drift here. So now I want to take away, I only want the user, the owner, to be able to read and write and nobody else. So say I want all the permissions to be the same. And, oh shoot, they are the same right now. Okay, let's set them all. This doesn't make any sense, but just go with me. Let's add the execute to all of them. So the execute permission. So chmod all plus X. So user, group, and other, my file, and we have it. If we wanted to take away the permission, notice this turned to green. When you see a file that's in green, the convention is, at least in this version of Mint, is when the execute bit is set. Of course, we can't execute that file. It's not an executable binary. Okay, so one last quick one. Let me see. Okay, so I've changed this so it's only got read, write, and execute for the user. So what if I wanted the group to also be that way? So we could type chmod user equals group for my files. So what we're saying is we want the user and group to be equal. And notice that it set it so it doesn't have any permissions on it. I don't know if I can do anything with that now. And actually I should have had g equals u there. Yikes. So let me reset this quickly. 700 my file. See if it's going to let me do that. It did let me do that. Okay, let me do that correctly. So here we're setting the group equal to the user. See the difference between those? There we go, and that's correct. Okay, the other way to do this. Let's say that we're doing this in something called Octal Location. So what this requires is addition at its highest level of math. So R equals 4, W equals 2, and execute equals 1. So this is an octal notation that adds up to 7, and if you start at 0 and go to 7, that's 8 different characters. That's octal notation. So R equals 4, W equals 2, X equals 1. So in this instance right here for user permissions, what does that equal? 4 plus 2 plus 1 equals 7. Here, 4 plus 2 plus 1 equals 7. Here, for other, 0 plus 0 plus 0 equals 0. See where I'm going here. So let's set this, the permissions for my file, so that it's back to its original, where it's read, write, read, and read. So R plus W for user, 4 plus 2 is 6. Now for group, we just want read. Read is 4. And for other, we want just read, and that's 4. myfile.txt. Is that what we have? Yes. Okay, what if we wanted to subtract the write capability for myfile.txt from the user? Then it's going to be chmod 4 read only, read myfile.txt. What if we wanted it read, write, and execute for everybody, for user, group, and other? Chmod 777 4 plus 2 plus 1. Read, write, and execute. Okay, what if we wanted the file so that it was only read and write for other, just read and write for other, and nothing for anybody else? It doesn't make any sense, but this is practice. This is the kind of stuff you should be doing. Make mistakes here, not on the job. So chmod 0 for user, 0 for group, and for other, read 4 plus write 2 equals 6. myfile.txt. Boy, you'll never see anything like that. There we go. Okay, so that ends this lecture where we looked at how to add users and delete users. We looked at how to change their passwords. We looked at how to change ownership of a file, how to change the group on a file, and we also looked at how to change permissions in 2 different ways. This is a lot of stuff that you can really practice very easily, get good at it. It's okay to make a mistake in here. If you do, you can always go back and rectify it.